Imagine a dog so loyal, so brave, he was trained to protect and serve. A German shepherd with intelligent eyes, who knew the scent of danger and the sound of a command. He was a hero in a K-9 unit, a partner to an officer, a defender of the peace. But then, picture that same dog, standing in a cold, concrete kennel. His value, once measured in courage and dedication, is now just a number on a tag. And on this day, that number is one. $1. That's all it took to buy a former police dog, cast aside by the very system he once served. This is the story of Rex, though that wasn't his name back then. He had an official call sign, a badge on his collar, a purpose. We don't know the exact reasons why he was deemed surplus, why he failed whatever test they put him through. Maybe he was too gentle, maybe he was too old, or maybe he just didn't connect with his handler. The reasons don't really matter when you're sitting in a cage, confused and abandoned. The auction was a grim affair, a place where working dogs who didn't make the cut were sold off to the highest bidder, or in this case, the only bidder. A man, seeing potential for a different kind of work, paid that $1 and led the powerful, uncertain shepherd away. The future looked bleak, a life chained in a yard, a guard dog for a scrapyard, a shadow of his former self. But stories have a way of changing direction in the most unexpected ways. This change came in the form of a little girl named Lily. She was 8 years old, all scraped knees and wide, curious eyes. She lived with her family a few doors down from where the man brought his new, $1 dog. And from the very first moment she saw him, she saw something nobody else did. The other kids were scared, whispering about the police dog and his sharp bark. The adults saw a problem, a potentially dangerous animal. But Lily? She saw sadness. She saw a beautiful creature, tied to a rusty old chain, who didn't wag his tail, who just watched the world with a deep, weary resignation. Lily was a child, so her actions were pure and uncomplicated by adult caution. She didn't ask for permission, she just started visiting the fence line. At first, she'd just sit on her side, a safe distance away, and talk to him. She'd tell him about her day at school, about the picture she painted, about the cloud that looked like a dragon. She'd slide pieces of her apple through the chain-link fence, talking softly all the while. The big dog would just watch her, his ears twitching, his head tilted. He didn't growl, but he didn't come closer either. It was a slow, patient courtship built on whispered secrets and fruit snacks. Weeks turned into a fragile routine. Then, one afternoon, something shifted. Lily was sitting there, humming a little song, when the dog, slowly, so slowly it was almost imperceptible, got up from his spot and walked towards the fence. He didn't bark. He didn't lunge. He gently sniffed the air around her, then lowered his massive head and nudged her small fingers with his wet nose. It was the first time he had ever chosen to approach her. In that moment, the failed police dog and the little girl forged a connection that defied all logic. She named him Hero, not because of what he was, but because of what she saw in him. But this is where our story takes a dark turn. The man who owned Hero wasn't cruel, but he was indifferent. He saw the dog as a utility, a cheap investment. He didn't like Lily coming around, calling his scrapyard guard dog by a silly name. He started shouting at her to stay away, telling her parents to keep their kid in line. The tension grew. Then, one fateful evening, disaster struck. A loud crash, the shattering of glass, and then a man's angry roar echoed from the scrapyard. Lily, who had been playing in her backyard, froze. She heard Hero barking, a sound she had never heard before, not a warning bark, but a sharp, pained yelp followed by a deep, threatening growl. Without a second thought, driven by a fear for her friend that was greater than her own, she slipped through a gap in the fence and ran towards the sound. What she saw in that dimly lit yard would haunt anyone. The man was standing, red-faced and furious, holding a heavy wooden stick. A broken window on his shed explained the crash. And in front of him, standing between the man and a shadowy corner of the yard, was Hero. The dog was transformed. Every muscle in his body was taut, his lips were pulled back in a snarl, and a low, continuous rumble vibrated from his chest. He was no longer the sad, chained animal. He was every inch the police dog he was trained to be, a formidable, dangerous barrier. But he wasn't growling at the shadow in the corner. His focus, his entire being, was fixed on the man with the stick. Lily followed his gaze to the corner, and her blood ran cold. There, huddled and trembling, was what had caused all the commotion. And in that single, heart-stopping moment, Lily understood exactly why Hero was positioning himself the way he was. He wasn't protecting the property. He wasn't even protecting himself. He was protecting something else entirely. He was standing guard over the most unexpected, the most vulnerable secret imaginable. The man raised the stick higher, his eyes wild with anger, and took a step forward. Hero's growl deepened into a sound of pure promise, a sound that said, "You will not take another step." The little girl stood frozen, 10 feet from a confrontation that was about to explode. One wrong move, one shouted word, and everything would shatter. The stick was poised in the air, the dog was ready to spring, and Lily. The world seemed to stop, holding its breath along with the little girl. The only sounds were the frantic thumping of her own heart and that terrible, low growl rumbling from Hero's chest. The man with the stick, Mr. Dobbs, was a silhouette of pure anger against the dim yard light. His eyes darted from the snarling dog to the shadowy corner, and then, for a split second, to Lily. His face was a confused mask of rage and surprise. "You," he barked at Lily, though he didn't dare lower the stick. "This is your fault. You and your silly games," filling his head with nonsense. But his words were shaky, undercut by the sheer power of the animal standing against him. Lily didn't answer. She couldn't. Her eyes were locked on the corner, trying to make sense of the shapes in the gloom. And then she saw it. A tiny, trembling movement. A small, furry body was pressed against the old, broken shed, and curled protectively around it were 3 even smaller, squirming shapes. A stray mother cat and her newborn kittens. Hero wasn't guarding the shed from the cat. He was guarding the cat from Mr. Dobbs. The mother cat, a scrawny tabby, had probably sought shelter from the cold, maybe knocking something over that broke the window. And Mr. Dobbs, in his fury over the damage, had come out ready to chase her off, or worse. But Hero had placed himself squarely in the path. This dog, who had been deemed a failure for being too soft, was now a bristling wall of muscle and teeth, defending the most vulnerable creatures he could find. Lily's mind raced back to the whispers she'd heard about Hero's past. Her dad had done some asking around after she'd first become interested in the dog. He was from a K-9 unit in a nearby city, but he'd been dropped from the program. The official reason was failure to demonstrate appropriate aggression. The trainers needed a dog who would bite on command, who wouldn't hesitate. But Hero, they said, would always hold back. He'd pin a suspect but wouldn't clamp down. He was too gentle. He saw a person, not a target. They called it a failure. But looking at him now, a fierce guardian standing between a frightened animal and a man with a weapon, Lily understood the truth. He hadn't failed. He had been miscast. His instinct wasn't to attack, it was to protect. "Get back, you stupid mutt!" Mr. Dobbs yelled, his voice cracking. He took a half-step forward, feinting with the stick. Hero didn't flinch. Instead, he took a single, deliberate step forward himself, his growl intensifying, a clear, unmistakable warning. The message was clear, *, this is my line. You will not cross it, *, the standoff was a taut wire, ready to snap. Lily knew she was the only one who could stop this. But what could an 8-year-old girl do? "Hero," she whispered, her voice barely audible. The dog's ear twitched, a tiny flicker of recognition, but his eyes never left Mr. Dobbs. She took a small, shaky step into the yard. "Lily, no! Get out of here," her mother's voice suddenly screamed from their back porch. The commotion had drawn her parents. Lily saw her dad, face pale, starting to hurry towards the fence, but he was too far away. The sudden noise broke Mr. Dobbs's concentration for just a moment. His eyes flicked towards Lily's parents, and in that single, unguarded instant, everything changed. Hero moved. It wasn't an attack. It was a fluid, powerful surge forward. He didn't leap at Mr. Dobbs's throat. He slammed his body into the man's legs, a hard, driving push that sent Mr. Dobbs stumbling backwards with a grunt of surprise. The stick clattered to the ground. The dog stood over it, his head low, his body still vibrating with tension, now positioned squarely between the stunned man, the terrified cat family, and Lily. He had created a safe zone. Mr. Dobbs scrambled to his feet, his anger now mixed with a dawning, cold fear. He was looking at the dog, truly looking at him, for the first time. This wasn't just a disobedient pet. This was a highly trained animal who had just made a very clear decision. He attacked me. Mr. Dobbs stammered, pointing a shaking finger. He was protecting them. Lily cried out, finding her voice at last. She pointed to the corner where the mother cat was now quietly licking her kittens, seemingly unaware of the human drama playing out for their sake. You were going to hurt them. He was just keeping them safe. Her father had reached the fence now, his eyes wide as he took in the scene, the fallen stick, the defensive dog, the cowering cats. The air was thick with unspoken questions. What happens now? Mr. Dobbs owned the dog, he had every right to be furious. But he had also raised a stick, and Hero had reacted in a way that was, in its own heartbreaking way, perfectly in line with his true nature. He was a protector, not a fighter. The law, however, might not see it that way. A dog that knocks down its owner is a dangerous dog. A dangerous dog, especially one with a police background, faces a very grim fate. Lily's father, Tom, spoke, his voice calm but firm. Joe, just take a breath. Nobody's hurt. Let's just all calm down. But Mr. Dobbs was already shaking his head, his initial fear hardening back into resentment. That's it. I'm done. This animal is a menace. I bought him to guard my property, not to turn on me. I'm calling the authorities in the morning. They'll know what to do with a failed police dog that attacks people. The word authorities hung in the air like a death sentence. Lily felt a cold dread wash over her. She looked at Hero. The big dog had finally broken his stare with Mr. Dobbs. He turned his head, his intelligent eyes finding Lily's. The ferocity was gone, replaced by a look of quiet confusion, as if he was waiting for her to tell him what to do next. He had done what he felt was right, and now the world was crashing down around him because of it. The bond between the girl and the dog was now a tether, the only thing holding him to a world that had rejected him twice. The night was quiet again, but the peace was fragile, a ticking clock counting down to a morning that promised to tear them apart forever. The silence after Mr. Dobbs's threat was heavier than any noise. Lily stood frozen, the image of Hero's confused eyes burned into her mind. Her father, Tom, was the first to break the stalemate. Joe, let's not do anything hasty, he said, his voice low and reasonable. It's dark, everyone's upset. Let's talk about this in the morning when we've all had a chance to cool off. Mr. Dobbs just snorted, rubbing his leg where Hero had bumped him. There's nothing to talk about, Tom. I paid for a guard dog, and I got a liability. He's their problem now. He jerked his thumb towards the K-9 unit he'd come from. They'll know what to do with him. He turned and stomped back towards his house, leaving the stick lying on the ground like a fallen weapon. The second the back door slammed shut, the fight seemed to drain out of Hero. His posture relaxed, the fierce ridge of fur along his back smoothing down. He let out a soft waft of air and turned, trotting back to the corner where the cat family was hidden. He didn't go too close, just lay down a few feet away, keeping a respectful watch, his body a shield against the world. The mother cat, seemingly understanding the danger had passed, gave a slow blink in his direction before settling back with her babies. Tom helped a trembling Lily back over the fence into their own yard. Her mother, Sarah, wrapped her in a tight hug. Oh, honey, you scare us half to death, she whispered into Lily's hair. Back inside, under the warm kitchen lights, the story tumbled out of Lily between hiccuping sobs. She told them about her secret visits, about the apples and the whispered stories, about how Hero had never once been mean, only sad. She explained what she had seen, the broken window, the stick, the cat and her kittens, and how Hero had moved not to attack, but to protect. Tom listened quietly, his face grim. He'd served in the army and knew a thing or two about trained animals and their instincts. He was doing a perimeter defense, he said, more to himself than to them. He identified the kittens as non-combatants and created a safe zone. That's not a failed dog. That's a dog with a different purpose. But understanding Hero's heart didn't solve the problem. Mr. Dobbs was a proud, stubborn man. He'd been embarrassed, and he would follow through on his threat. The authorities for a former police dog weren't the friendly local animal control. It would be his old unit. And a K-9 unit couldn't have a dog with a recorded aggression incident, even a questionable one, out in the world. The likely outcome was unthinkable. "We can't let them take him, Dad," Lily pleaded, her eyes swimming with tears. They'll put him down. He was just being a hero." Tom and Sarah exchanged a worried look. They were caught in an impossible situation. They couldn't just take their neighbor's dog, even if he was a dollar dog. That was theft. Talking to Dobbs seemed hopeless. The clock was ticking towards morning. Meanwhile, a different kind of storm was brewing. A teenager who lived across the street had been filming the entire confrontation on his phone through his bedroom window. The shaky, dramatic footage, the snarling dog, the man with the stick, the brave little girl stepping into the frame, was already being edited with a tense soundtrack. He posted it online with a caption that read, "Abandoned police dog protects kittens from angry owner." Will he be punished? The internet, as it does, took the bait. While Lily finally fell into a fitful sleep, the video began to spread. It was shared by animal lovers, by former police officers, by people who just loved an underdog story. Comments flooded in. "That's not aggression, that's valor," one person wrote. Another tagged the local news station, "Is this how we treat our K-9 veterans?" The story had angles nobody on their quiet street could have predicted. It was no longer just about a man and a dog, it was about justice, redemption, and the very definition of what makes a hero. The next morning, Lily woke up with a pit in her stomach. She peeked out her window. Hero was still there, lying in the same spot, though he lifted his head when he saw her curtain move. Mr. Dobbs's truck was still in his driveway. So far, so good. But as she was eating her cereal, she saw a sleek, official-looking sedan pull up to Mr. Dobbs's house. Two men in crisp uniforms got out. They stood tall, with the no-nonsense posture of officers. One of them carried a thick leash and a catch pole. They were from the K-9 unit. Lily's spoon clattered into her bowl. Her heart felt like it was being squeezed. They were here. It was really happening. She watched, helpless, as Mr. Dobbs came out and pointed towards Hero. He was talking loudly, gesturing with his hands, no doubt telling his version of the story. The two officers listened, their faces neutral and unreadable. Then, the one with the catch pole nodded and started walking towards the back of the house, towards Hero. Lily couldn't breathe. This was it. They were going to take her friend away to a place from which he would never return. The story was about to end in the worst way possible, and she was powerless to stop it. All she could do was watch the tragedy unfold from her kitchen window. Lily didn't think. She just moved. The world outside her window had turned into a nightmare, and she was the only one who could step into it. She slipped out the back door, her heart hammering against her ribs like a trapped bird. The morning air was cool, but she felt burning hot with a fear she'd never known. The two officers were in Mr. Dobbs's yard now. The one with the thick leash and the long pole, a tool that looked so cold and impersonal, was speaking in low, firm tones to Hero. "Easy now, boy. Easy." Hero was on his feet, his body stiff. He wasn't growling, but a low, uncertain rumble echoed in his chest. He recognized the uniforms, the scent of his old life, and it was confusing him. His eyes kept darting towards Lily's house, looking for her. Mr. Dobbs stood with his arms crossed, a satisfied look on his face. "See? Still aggressive. I told you." "Hero!" Lily's voice cut through the tension, sharp and clear. She was at the fence, her small fingers gripping the chain link. All eyes turned to her. The second officer put a hand out. "Miss, you need to step back inside, it's not safe." But Lily wasn't looking at him. She was looking at Hero. The big dog's ears twitched at the sound of his new name. The low rumble in his chest stopped. His tail gave a single, hesitant wag. "His name is Hero," Lily said again, her voice trembling but defiant. "He wasn't being bad last night. He was protecting the kittens. He's a good dog." The officer with the pole glanced back at his partner, a flicker of uncertainty in his eyes. This wasn't the reaction they were used to from a so-called dangerous dog. They were trained to see a threat, but the scene before them was a paradox: a little girl with absolute faith, and a powerful animal whose loyalty was clearly divided. It was then that a new car, a familiar local news van, pulled up to the curb with a quiet urgency. A reporter and a cameraman jumped out, their equipment already humming to life. The online video had done its work, and the story had tipped from neighborhood drama into a public event. Mr. Dobbs's smug expression faltered. This was not the quiet, professional disposal he had been counting on. The cameraman shouldered his camera, the red recording light glowing like a malevolent eye. The reporter, a woman with a kind but determined face, assessed the situation instantly. She didn't rush in, but her presence changed everything. The stakes were now public. Seeing the camera, Mr. Dobbs grew flustered. "This is private property. You can't be here," he shouted, but his voice lacked its earlier conviction. The lead K-9 officer, a man named Sergeant Miller, felt the ground shifting under his feet. His mission was simple: secure the dog. But now he had a hysterical neighbor, a defiant child, a news crew, and a dog that was looking less like a threat and more like a victim with every passing second. He made a decision. "Miss," he said to Lily, his tone softer now. "You seem to know this dog. Can you call him to you? Can you show us?" It was a test. A dangerous one. If Hero came to her, it proved his temperament was stable and his bond was with the girl. If he didn't, or if he showed any sign of aggression, it would confirm Mr. Dobbs's story and seal his fate. Every single person in that yard held their breath. The camera lens focused on Lily. The world had shrunk to this one impossible request. Lily's knees felt weak. She looked at Hero, who was watching her, waiting for a signal. She thought of all their quiet afternoons, of the apples, of the secrets she'd told him. She thought of him standing guard over the tiny, helpless kittens. She poured all of that love and trust into her voice. "Hero," she whispered, her voice cracking. "Come." For a heart-stopping moment, he didn't move. He looked at the officers, then at Mr. Dobbs, then back at Lily. It was as if he was weighing the cost of his choice. Then, with a quiet sigh that seemed to deflate his powerful frame, he turned his back on his past. He ignored the men in uniform, ignored the fuming man who owned him on paper, and walked slowly, deliberately, towards the fence. Towards Lily. He didn't jump or bark. He simply stopped in front of her, lowered his great head, and nudged her hand with his wet nose. A collective, silent gasp seemed to go through the yard. The cameraman zoomed in on the moment, the massive German shepherd, gentle as a lamb, being scratched behind the ears by a little girl half his size. It was the most powerful evidence imaginable. But the conflict wasn't over. It had just transformed. Sergeant Miller's face was a storm of conflict. The dog had passed the test, spectacularly. But the law was the law. Mr. Dobbs was the legal owner, and he was demanding the dog be taken. The department's protocol was clear. Yet, taking this dog now, in front of this child and this camera, felt profoundly, gut-wrenchingly wrong. He was trapped between his duty and what was right. Mr. Dobbs saw his victory slipping away. "He's my dog," he insisted, his voice rising to a shout. "I have the bill of sale. $1. He's my property, and I want him taken away. Now." Sergeant Miller looked from the furious man, to the weeping girl with her arms around the dog's neck, to his partner's uneasy face, and finally to the unblinking eye of the camera. He had to make a call. His career, the department's reputation, and a dog's life hung in the balance. He took a deep breath, the weight of the moment pressing down on him. The next words out of his mouth would change everything forever. The tension was a physical thing, a wire stretched to its absolute limit, ready to snap with a sound that would echo through all their lives. The silence in the yard was absolute, broken only by the faint hum of the camera. All eyes were locked on Sergeant Miller. His jaw was tight, the uniform feeling more like a cage than ever before. He had to uphold the law. The man had a bill of sale. It was a simple, terrible fact. "Mr. Dobbs," the sergeant began, his voice heavy with reluctance. "The dog is legally yours. But given the circumstances, I'd strongly advise you to reconsider. We can facilitate a transfer to a rescue organization." "No," Dobbs interrupted, his face a hard mask of triumph. "I don't want a transfer. I want him gone. He's dangerous, and I want him dealt with. That's your job." He crossed his arms, his meaning chillingly clear. He wanted the dog euthanized. A small, broken sound escaped Lily's throat, and she buried her face in Hero's fur. Her father, Tom, who had been watching from the fence line, stepped forward, his face dark with anger. "Joe, for heaven's sake, be a human being. Look at him." It was at that exact moment, as emotions reached their breaking point, that a new voice cut through the tension. "Excuse me? Sergeant Miller?" The news reporter, Anna, was holding up her phone, her eyes wide with a kind of electric urgency. "I think you need to see this. We're live. And the station is being flooded with calls." She turned the screen towards the sergeant. It showed a live video feed, the very scene they were standing in. But it was the scrolling comments that were the real shock. They were flying by too fast to read, but fragmented phrases leaped out. #SaveHero, K9 veteran, this is an outrage. And then, one name, repeated over and over again, caught the sergeant's eye, Captain Riggs. Anna scrolled down and pulled up a different post. It was from a man in his 50s, his profile picture showing him in a police uniform, a proud German shepherd at his side. The caption read, "That's my dog. His name is Rex. I was his first handler. He didn't fail. I retired. The department reassigned him, and he wouldn't bond with a new handler because he was grieving for me. They labeled him a failure and sold him off. I've been looking for him for 6 months. Do not let them destroy that dog. I'm on my way." The ground seemed to shift under Sergeant Miller's feet. This changed everything. This wasn't just an abandoned dog, this was a retired K9 officer, a veteran who had served, who had a handler who loved him. The public relations disaster he had feared was now a full-blown firestorm, and it was based on a fundamental injustice. Before anyone could process this bombshell, the sound of a car door slamming shut made everyone jump. A man, his face etched with a mixture of desperation and hope, was striding up the driveway. He wasn't in uniform, just a simple jacket and jeans, but he moved with a purpose that commanded attention. He ignored everyone else, his eyes scanning the yard until they landed on Hero, whose head had snapped up at the new arrival. The big dog froze. His entire body went rigid. For a second, he seemed to stop breathing. Then, a sound emerged from him that no one in that yard had ever heard before, a high, keening whine, a noise of pure, unadulterated emotion. He took a hesitant step forward, then another, pulling away from Lily's embrace. The man, Captain Riggs, fell to one knee, his own composure crumbling. "Rex," he whispered, his voice thick. "Hey, boy. It's me." Hero, Rex, broke into a run. He didn't jump or bark. He simply hurled himself into the man's arms, burying his head in his chest, his whole body wiggling and trembling, whining and licking the man's face in a frantic, joyful reunion. The bond was instant, undeniable, and heartbreakingly powerful. This was his person. The one he had been mourning for all these lonely months. The camera captured every second of it, and the online audience watched, utterly captivated. Mr. Dobbs looked on, his confidence evaporating, replaced by the dawning realization that he was now the villain in a story everyone was watching. But the legal problem remained, a cold, hard knot at the center of this emotional storm. Captain Riggs may have been his handler, but he didn't own him. Mr. Dobbs did, for the price of $1. Captain Riggs stood up, one hand resting protectively on Rex's head. He looked at Sergeant Miller, then at Mr. Dobbs, his eyes blazing with a fierce, protective light. "That's my partner," he said, his voice low and steady, leaving no room for argument. "And I'm not leaving here without him." The standoff was no longer just about a dog. It was about loyalty, about justice for a retired K-9, and about a little girl's love crashing into the cold hard wall of the law. Two men, both with a claim, faced each other. One held a piece of paper. The other held 6 months of grief and a bond forged in service. And caught in the middle was the dog, and the girl who had saved him when no one else would. The conflict had just become infinitely more complicated, and the resolution felt further away than ever. The air was so thick with tension you could almost touch it. On one side stood Mr. Dobbs, clutching the $1 bill of sale like a shield, his face set in stubborn defiance. On the other stood Captain Riggs, his hand resting on Rex's head, a silent promise of protection in his eyes. Between them stood Sergeant Miller, trapped between a rock and a hard place, the camera's red light a constant reminder that the whole world was watching. "The law is clear," Mr. Dobbs insisted, though his voice had lost its bluster. "He's my property. I want him removed." Captain Riggs didn't even look at him. He kept his gaze locked on the sergeant. "Miller, you know me. You know this dog. He served this department for 7 years. This isn't right." His voice cracked, and Rex nudged his hand, as if to comfort him. It was then that Lily, who had been watching the reunion with a heart full of conflicting emotions, joy for Hero, but a crushing sense of loss for herself, spoke up. Her voice was small, but it cut through the arguing men. "He's not property." Everyone turned to look at her. Tears were streaming down her face, but she stood straight. "You can't own a hero for $1. You can't own a friend. He's Hero. And he saved those kittens. He's a good dog." She looked at Captain Riggs, her lower lip trembling. "He missed you so much." That simple, heartfelt statement from a child seemed to drain all the anger out of the situation. The camera zoomed in on her face, on her pure, uncomplicated love for the animal. Sergeant Miller let out a long, slow breath. He looked from the desperate former handler, to the heartbroken little girl, to the furious neighbor, and made a decision that was all heart, and no protocol. "Joe," he said to Mr. Dobbs, his tone final. "We are not taking this dog. If you want to press the matter, you'll have to sue your former K-9 unit, this little girl, and a retired police captain, all on live television. I don't like those odds. I'm declaring this a civil matter and leaving the premises." He nodded to his partner, and they began walking back to their car, effectively ending the official threat. Mr. Dobbs sputtered, his face purpling with rage and humiliation. He was utterly defeated. With a final, furious glare, he turned and stormed into his house, slamming the door so hard the windows rattled. A collective sigh of relief seemed to wash over the yard. The immediate danger was over. Captain Riggs knelt down, pulling a shaking Lily into a hug alongside Rex. "Thank you," he whispered into her hair. "Thank you for taking care of him when I couldn't." It seemed like the perfect happy ending. The hero dog was reunited with his original partner, the little girl was a savior, and the grumpy neighbor was vanquished. But as Captain Riggs stood, he looked at Lily's face, at the way she was clinging to Rex, and he saw the true cost of this victory. He was about to take away her best friend. "Lily," he said gently, his own heart breaking. "I can never, ever thank you enough. You saved his life." He paused, the words sticking in his throat. "But, he's coming to live with me now. I have a house with a big yard, just outside the city." Lily nodded, trying to be brave, but a fresh wave of tears spilled down her cheeks. She buried her face in Rex's fur one last time. This was the ending she had known was coming, but it hurt more than she could have ever imagined. Captain Riggs watched them, and the twist he was about to offer was one he hadn't even known he was going to make until that very moment. "My house," he said, his voice gaining a new strength, "is only about a 20-minute drive from here." Lily looked up, confused. "A dog," Captain Riggs continued, a genuine smile breaking through his emotional exhaustion, "especially a retired working dog, needs a job. And a purpose. And it seems to me that Rex here has found a new one." He looked from the dog to the girl. "His job is being your friend, Lily. And my job is to make sure he can do it." He proposed a deal, a partnership. Rex would live with him, but he would be a regular visitor. Weekends, holidays, summer afternoons. He would be their shared dog. Lily's heroic best friend, and Captain Riggs's loyal partner, finally enjoying the retirement he deserved, surrounded by the people who loved him most. The joy that lit up Lily's face was brighter than the morning sun. It wasn't the ending anyone had expected, but it was the right one. As the news crew packed up, capturing the final shot of the little girl, the retired police captain, and the $1 dog now worth more than any treasure, walking together out of the yard, the story found its true conclusion. It wasn't about ownership. It was about family. And sometimes, the most heroic act of all is simply knowing how to share. The following Saturday, a familiar car pulled up in front of Lily's house. Before it had even fully stopped, a joyful bark echoed from inside. Captain Riggs, now just Ben to Lily's family, opened the door, and Rex, though Lily would always call him Hero, bounded out. He didn't run to the yard, he ran straight for the front door, where Lily was already waiting, her face split by a grin so wide it looked like it might hurt. The reunion was a whirlwind of wiggling bodies and happy laughter. It was different from the tense standoff of just a few days before. This was pure, uncomplicated joy. Ben stood by his car, watching as the dog covered Lily's face in sloppy kisses. The heavy weight of guilt he'd carried for months, the grief of thinking he'd failed his partner, finally began to lift. He hadn't just found his dog, he'd found a new, unexpected piece of his world. Life began to settle into a new, beautiful rhythm. Ben was true to his word. Hero spent every weekend and Wednesday evening with Lily. Those days were filled with important work. Hero's job was to lie patiently while Lily practiced reading to him, his head resting on her lap. His job was to accompany her on adventures in the backyard, where they would check on the mother cat and her growing kittens, who now had a proper home in a cozy shelter Tom had built. The cat, whom Lily had named Whiskers, had lost her fear, often brushing against Hero's legs as if thanking her giant, gentle guardian. The story of the $1 police dog didn't just fade away. The news segment, edited to highlight the emotional reunion and the unique shared custody solution, went viral a second time, but for all the right reasons. It became a story about redemption, second chances, and the incredible bonds that can form between humans and animals. A local animal rescue organization, inspired by the tale, reached out to Ben and Lily. They asked if Hero would become their official ambassador for adopted animals, and of course, they said yes. One sunny afternoon, they attended their first event together. Hero, wearing a special bandana that read "Adopted and Amazing," stood calmly by Lily's side as she, with a confidence she'd never had before, told their story to a small crowd. She talked about seeing the sadness in his eyes, about the apples through the fence, and about the night he protected the kittens. He just needed someone to be kind to him, she said, her voice clear and strong. And he needed a job. Now his job is to be my best friend and to show everyone that adopted pets are the best pets. People listened, captivated not by a dramatic news story, but by the simple, powerful truth from a child. That day, several older dogs and cats from the rescue found their own forever homes. Mr. Dobbs, meanwhile, became something of a recluse. The backlash from the community was quiet but firm. Neighbors who had once just nodded hello now looked the other way. The story of his $1 dog had painted him as the villain, and that was a hard label to shake. He saw Lily and Ben walking Hero through the neighborhood, saw the dog's happy, lolling tongue and the girl's bright face, and a strange, complicated feeling settled in his chest. It wasn't quite regret, but it was a dawning understanding that some things hold a value that can't be measured in dollars. The biggest change, however, was in Hero himself. The deep, lingering sadness in his eyes was completely gone, replaced by a calm, watchful contentment. He had 2 homes, 2 people who adored him, and a life filled with purpose. He was a retired K-9 officer, a guardian of kittens, a reading companion, and a rescue ambassador. He had more jobs than ever, and he excelled at every single one. One evening, as Ben was getting ready to take Hero back to his house for the week, Lily was giving the dog one last, tight hug. "I love you, Hero," she whispered. Ben watched them, and a thought that had been growing in his heart finally found its voice. "You know, Lily," he said, leaning against the doorframe. "My backyard is pretty big. And it gets awfully quiet during the week." He paused, letting the idea hang in the air. "I was thinking, maybe, when Whisker's kittens are old enough and find their own homes, their mom might need a place to stay. A place with a big backyard and a very large, very gentle friend. What do you think?" Lily's eyes grew wide, looking from Ben to Hero and then towards the backyard where Whiskers was curled up. A whole family, woven together by chance and kindness. She nodded, her heart too full for words. The story of the abandoned police dog sold for $1 had finally reached its true end. It wasn't an end of goodbyes, but of new beginnings. It was a story that proved that a single act of kindness from a little girl could ripple outwards, changing the lives of a dog, a man, a community, and even a scrawny tabby cat. Hero was home, not at one address, but in the hearts of those who loved him. And in the end, that was the most valuable thing of all.